Supporting children who are gender independent, gender nonconforming, or transgender in the early childhood settings. Audience. The audience I chose to present this to is RECEs and families. I chose other registered early childhood educators and families because I think it's important to make other registered ECEs aware of and to give families more information on so they know some ways to support their child if they decide to be in the LGBTQ plus community. It also helps the registered ECEs to plan a curriculum to support children who are in the LGBTQ plus community. Definitions. Gender independent is children whose gender identity and or gender expression differs from what others expect their assigned sex. Gender nonconforming is an individual whose gender identity or gender expression differs from the gender norms associated with the sex they were assigned with at birth. Transgender individuals are whose gender identity is different from their assigned biological sex at birth and whose gender expression is different from the way they males or females are stereotypically expected to look or behave. A timeline of the LGBTQ plus rights. In 1977, Quebec became the first province in Canada to include sexual orientation in its Human Rights Act. Discrimination against heterosexuals, homosexuals, and bisexuals was prohibited. In 1978, the Canadian Immigration Act was altered so that it no longer prohibited homosexuals from immigrating into the country. In 1979, the Human Rights Commission recommended that sexual orientation be added to the Canadian Human Rights Act. In 1980, a bill was introduced to Parliament that was to prohibit discrimination against homosexuals, bisexuals, and homosexuals by adding sexual orientation to the Canadian Human Rights Act, but it was failed to pass. In 1986, the Human Rights Code was amended to include sexual orientation as a protected class. In 1989, the Canadian Human Rights Commission ruled that same-sex couples and their children should be considered a family. In 1995, the province of Ontario extended family benefits to the LGBTQ plus employees in same-sex relationships. In 1996, Bill C-33 passed the federal parliament. The term sexual orientation was added to the Federal Human Rights Act as a protected class. In 2003, the Ontario Court of Appeal ordered the Ontario government to issue marriage licenses to same-sex adults, couples, and to register their marriages. In 2005, Bill C-38 made same-sex marriages available across Canada and was signed into law. How can we support gender-independent, gender nonconforming, or transgender in early childhood settings? We can do that by advocating for gender-independent, gender nonconforming, transgender, and the whole LGBTQ plus community. We could read books that talks about different genders. We can give children choices. We can research about the LGBTQ plus community before teaching it to children or others.
we have to, as educators, do better in terms of what we're sharing, what we're showing. It can't just be on the walls. It has to be a part of the conversations. It has to be a part of the work we're doing, the curriculum, the understandings. And I say honoring because honoring, I think, is an important word there. It's not just about including. I think that honoring is really that point of validating and accepting that goes beyond just an inclusion. And we just have to do more in terms of that curriculum. And at the same time, I'll say, but it has to start with the educator's own understandings.
Right.
So the educators, there needs to be more across systems where, as educators, there's opportunities to think about your own biases, think about your own gender binaries that you put on people and places and things, think about your own homophobia, think about your own stuff that you bring into that classroom all the time, and how kids pick up on that.
Right.
And so yes, it's one thing to where people say, well, I'm just neutral. Well, you're not neutral. There's no such thing as neutral. What that says a lot by you just leaving things out, right? And so you're not neutral about having pictures of your husband and kids if you're a woman on the desk. You're not neutral about that. That sends a message. What
Right.
books you're choosing to read, what novels you're choosing to study, what conversations you're choosing to have. I mean, at this age, middle school, there's conversation. You can bring in lots of different things that are part of real kids' lives and can impact them in really powerful ways every day. So, as educators, how are we having the conversations to even know how to address it in our own classroom spaces and working on our own stuff?
How to approach educators. We need to calmly and be understanding when we're approaching other educators on the topic, asking questions to see if they have an understanding of how to incorporate gender independent, gender nonconforming, transgender, and the LGBTQ plus community in their classrooms. We can offer some resources for other educators if they are feeling stuck on how to support a student or question a student may have about the topic. We can also offer our knowledge and workshops to other educators to help them understand or be engaged with children that are gender independent, gender nonconforming, transgender, and a part of the LGBTQ plus community. How to approach parents and caregivers. We need to calmly and be understanding when approaching to parents and caregivers. We can provide resources like websites, books, videos to help parents and caregivers understand gender independence, gender nonconforming, transgender, and the LGBTQ plus community. We need to be supportive of the information that they may already know and the information they may want to know. We need to have an open mind when approaching a parent or caregiver because we don't know what they do know or what they have been told. We need we can ask if they need support and help to understand gender independence, gender nonconforming, transgender, and the LGBTQ plus community. Ideas on how to incorporate it in the classroom, providing books in the classroom about gender independent, gender nonconforming, transgender, and the LGBTQ plus community. Avoid splitting groups or lines up into boys and girls. Just have one main line. Adjusting your language and vocabulary you use in your classroom. Having lots of resources for children to go to and learn from in your classroom, like books, posters, videos. Make the classroom a safe place for all children. Don't single out a few students based on their gender. And be a supportive adult and educator for children to come to if they need support or someone to talk to.
can't
Right.
force somebody to be an ally.
Yep.
It means you are somebody who really wants to do that extra work to be there, because ally is not something you just call yourself because you have a friend who's trans.
Right.
We all know ally is a verb, it's not a noun. It takes work. So those who really want to put in that extra work to be part of this movement and work with the community are getting this extra training. And but in schools, we have a large number of trans kids. You need allies in school. You need teachers who know what this means and knows what this is, and it should be mandatory in order to be a teacher to be somebody who gets gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, orientation, all those things. So this needs to be in the curriculum for new teachers. I recently spoke to a group of education students, and it wasn't a mandatory section. There were only several people there, and it was kind of disappointing because I have gone to classes where they had worked it into an actual class time, so everyone in that class received training.
Right.
I want to see this as part of the curriculum. I want to see this as part of the HR policies and training that teachers receive. And it doesn't have to be an extensive, 1-week training session, but at least knowing the basics.
Right.
The most important thing is to listen to the young people. They know more than anyone else who they are. 90% of us know we are trans before we reach our 20s. So we know who we are. We know what it is that we want to be called, and we should be the ones who are steering the ship, which is our journey. Your role as a teacher, as a parent, as a guardian, as a caring adult is to help us see the obstacles in our way and shine light on those. But it's up to the person to choose their journey.
The lesson plan. So on day 1, I could offer an activity that asks questions like, is it a girl or a boy thing? To raise awareness of stereotyping genders. This can allow educators to see how much knowledge students have about the LGBTQ plus community, and gives educators an idea how to incorporate and teach children more about the LGBTQ plus community. On day 2, you can read books like The Pronoun Book by Chris Ayla Kronos and Melita Terrado, and book It Feels Good to Be Yourself by Theresa Thorne, and then ask students if they have any questions about the 2 books that you read. On the left, the book It Feels Good to Be Yourself about gender identity, and the book on the right is The Pronoun Book. Closing questions. Do you think you have a better understanding of gender independent, gender nonconforming, transgender, and the LGBTQ plus community? And is there anything you took away or stuck with you through this presentation? And these are my resources.